Good afternoon. How are you? Good to talk to you today. Well, the good guys are getting some free throws at the incompetence and misconduct of Trump's men. The worst you could find, the most corrupt, the most evil. But let me talk about a couple of things. First of all, the temperature is about 50. It's a little windy. They say 20 miles an hour. I apologize if it's interfering with hearing what I'm saying, but it doesn't feel that great right now. The day is a special day for Holly and I, and I wouldn't mention it but for the fact that many of you and others helped us through some very difficult times, which I think is the hallmark of a society that cares about its people. And the incident I'm talking about is Holly, 3 years ago, on this date, on a Friday, today is not Friday, we got notice that a young lady had died and there were a pair of lungs that Holly was suited to have. And the question was, did she want to have it? We were watching some movie on TV. It was 8-ish or 9-ish in the evening. And the question they put is, do you want to accept them? And I immediately said, absolutely. Holly talked to her sister, who's a doctor, and she had the same reaction medically and familially as I did. And we talked to a member of the team, the transplant team, and they recommended it. And Dr. Bush had done 100 of these operations. But here's the thing. That evening, while we were at the hospital, we went immediately to Johns Hopkins. And while we were there, sometime, I think in the early morning hours, my partner called. And I thought I had the thing under control. And I told him he didn't have to bother himself. But his thinking on the subject was better than mine. And those of you who have been through crises, and we all have by a certain age, know that the people we care about and who know us sometimes know when we need we need help that we don't think we need. And the sign to me was, in fact, a drop of blood went into my right eye. And I thought it had to do with a surge of blood pressure. I'm an amateur hypochondriac. But then others came. Of course, her siblings came. Her daughter came. People offered us food and kindness. There were something like 2 million people on social media who wished us well. And that's the point that I want to get to. We go over the events today at a distance. 3 years is good. And what you do as time goes on is you take medications to avoid infections and to avoid rejection. And so far, we've done well by those standards because the transplant team keeps us informed. But the first week of this operation, there were 2 nights when both Holly and I thought she wasn't going to make it. And I think I should share with you the story of a doctor figuring out how to handle a situation that was still in doubt, that is, within hours of after the operation. And this taller doctor, whom I have seen execute imagery within her lungs to see how they were. And it was like a maestro, the way he moved the equipment. And there were about 10 people around talking about alternatives and what could or should happen. And he came, and he was a taller man, and he put his hands on my hands. And he said to me that I should stay with her. Now, this was ambiguous, but necessarily so. Because what he was saying, and I think honestly and transparently, was stay with her in case she doesn't make it. But the other side of it was stay with her because attitude matters. and you can help her. And if there's one thing from the transplant experience, it is that attitude makes such a huge difference. Now, if you fall down and break your arm, your attitude is not going to put it back together. But when you're healing, I think it makes a difference. And I saw it in the hospital. You know, there's an expression among horsemen and women that when you come to a jump, throw your heart over it, and your body and the horse will follow. So there's that. Now, this is a lesson that I apply to our current political chaos that has as its object, at least from the standpoint of the Oval Office, turning America into a dictatorship, a monarchy, an oligarchy, but not a republic nor a democracy. And these guys have charged around doing the dumbest, craven, hateful things they could think of, unconcerned as ignorant and evil are of the consequences of this. Now, we had a great example of this, verifiable in a way that is nowhere near partisan, that involves the security of our country and of our allies and of the world's respect that we know what we're doing. And that was where a bunch of white frat boys got together on a line, beating their chests, criticizing the allies, saying they'd make them pay for what they were planning to do with the Houthi in Yemen. And stupidly, but wonderfully for us, one of these dolts had invited a journalist to participate. And he thought it might have been a joke, but found out it was nothing of the sort. And what has happened since? What has happened since is, instead of what you or I might do, we might come forward and say, oh, we really screwed up here. But that's not what they did. They denied it ever happened. They denied there was any risk. They denied there was any problem. I knew an astronaut, Gene Cernan, C-E-R-N-A-N. He was literally the last man to walk on the moon from NASA. And I represented a number of astronauts. And I'm going to get to the point here. I'm going to contrast Gene with what we're seeing now. Now, Gene was slated to go to the moon in the pecking order. But to practice for any land operations on the moon, he would fly a helicopter, and he would fly it around for a while to use up some fuel so that if something went wrong, there would not be a terrible incident. But somehow or other, the optics played tricks with him. And he looked at the waters below, and he thought he was of a higher height than he was. And we don't know all the details, but as a result, the helicopter crashed, and there was a holy hellfire rising from the waters, and he was under the water, and amazingly, he survived. But he figured that his trip to the moon was gone because of it. And he was offered with alternatives to blame it on equipment failure and a variety of things. And knowing what it would mean to his career, he said, no, I did it. It was all on me. I did this wrong thing, and I accept all the consequences. That's an American patriot. That is a hero. That is a man who puts above all the duty to do the job and to do it right and well, and if you can't, you step back. I can't say it was because of that or his proficiency or both, but he made that moonshot. We had a similar situation with our so-called defense secretary, in which when confronted with the findings of this journalist, he said, it's a lie. He makes up things. That newspaper, that magazine, Atlantic, that's a piece of trash. And I'm paraphrasing, but you've probably heard it. And he looked out of control in the picture. Now, I do know that if you think you're projecting before a group, but the microphone's right in front of you, you may sound a little too loud. But he was talking to a reporter on a tarmac, and the reporter was only feet away from him. And he looked kind of crazy to me. You be the judge. But he denied talking about anything involving the attack in Yemen. As did others. Everyone who was involved denied it. And today, the reporter who had been defamed and the magazine accused of various things that they had not done, released the actual back and forth among these white frat boys having fun with the most delicate, sensitive information at the expense of our nation and the reputation of the person who observed it firsthand, having mistakenly been allowed and invited to join this app discussing classified information of an action that did occur. So, the lies abound, and if you read and you should, because it's fascinating, if you read the text of what was said, you'll see the lies are magnificent by our defense secretary, and the flaw is enormous by all those people who participated. Any one of them could see who was in the group. So, what is a right and just action? Well, there are several. One is our defense secretary should be offering his resignation, because not only did he violate the basic principles of handling sensitive and classified material, given the opportunity to remain silent publicly, he instead lied to the nation, lied to the media. And that's not tolerable. Many people say, I would just say, I screwed up, here's my resignation, it might or might not be accepted. But not this gang of thieves, not these people. They war without responsibility. I was in Lower Manhattan on a case many years ago now, and near the courthouses, there's a lot of recruiting stations, and that's because there's so many colleges there. And the recruiting agents give coffee and donuts and stuff, and talk to these men and women about enlisting, and some do. So, in my walks, occasionally I'd stop when I'd see one not talking to a student, and I'd ask them, what do you tell them, and what do they think? And I'm not being critical here, I was just curious. And when asked, they say, I just want to blow things up. I just want to blow things up. Now, I'm not sure that a person like that shouldn't be screened. But it's human, it's believable. Or does the number count more? Now, it's plain that these white frat boys didn't give a damn about what was right. This is a very heady experience. And it involved a questionable operation. Because as I understand it from the notes, and we'll confirm or deny this in the days ahead, this was a drone strike against an individual presumed to be important to the Houthis who would take over Yemen. And this is basically assassination of an individual for their function. Now, if I read the numbers correctly, 51 people died. Was that 51 people died so we could get this one? And another thing that happened was, in the discussion that is classified, without any of our allies knowing about this, as far as I can tell right now, and with one of the members of the team actually in Moscow meeting with Putin at or about the time this operation went forward, they talked about the allies paying, quote, their fair share of money for this operation that they had not been consulted with. The vice president suggested it shouldn't even occur, that Americans would not support it. And then you also have to ask yourself, if they did this, meaning using risky security, then was this the only time? Hard to believe. Hard to believe. And it's not so simple as hacking, but it may be made easier when you have one of the people who are participating sitting in a, how would I describe it, intelligence-rich atmosphere in Russia, where one of the members of the team was, of what I call the white frat boys. So now what is going to be done? I give high marks to the Democrats who attacked these people on the Hill 2 days in a row, today as well, after the information was released. And we hear from military people saying this was classified, no question about it. And the Republicans are trying to distinguish it instead of following their oath to preserve and protect our nation and to, in essence, be concerned to the point of asking, where's your resignation? What do we need to know? They want time so they can figure out if people will continue to care. But I think this is going to be something that keeps going on, because this didn't just happen this one time. And there's been a request made or about to be made by a Republican and Democrat for an inspector general to investigate this. Are you kidding? They were all fired. What honest inspector general do we have to consider this? Does anybody have a thinking cap on? Does anybody think more than 2 steps in front of them? It sure seems not. Do you have to be a military mind, in order to understand what's wrong with this picture? So, those are a few of my observations. I did hear some of the testimony. I didn't hear all of it. If I got anything wrong, call me on it. But I think to the extent I've discussed any of these elements, they're really based on public statements by the principals, good and bad statements, the documents that were released by Atlantic, and things I heard them say both yesterday and today. And you can find the same material yourself and figure it out. So we have these guys waging war without responsibility, and the rest of the causes we might discuss are about capitalism without a conscience. Think of Social Security. Think of any of the things, firing people. Our nation is in the pits, and we're approaching pitchfork possibilities. I'm very curious to see on Friday, and I've said this before, how many will show up for this town meeting, because this is a self-motivating, annoying thing to do on a Friday unless you're motivated. And people are more and more motivated by the heinous things that are being done to their safety and security domestically and internationally. So, that's a few of my thoughts from the Cathedral of Trees, and with any luck, I'll see you all tomorrow. Bye-bye.